Everybody, welcome back to Leosophy. This is the, I think, fifth part, maybe it's the fourth part in the religious series. And last time I mentioned Gnosticism, and I was kind of thinking about maybe doing the Aborigine religion, but since I mentioned it last time, this episode is going to be about Gnosticism. So, Gnosticism is a very interesting branch, if you could call it, of Christianity that is so far removed from the orthodoxy, and by which I mean all of the Christianity that people think of, not specifically the Greek Orthodox, I mean all of it, that in many respects constitutes a separate religion. It's very different. In some ways it's an inversion, and I hate using that word because it makes it sound like Gnostics are satanic, which I'll get more into that later, but they have been persecuted to the ends of the earth. In fact, a lot of the negative words you hear, like bugger, actually comes from sects and branches of Gnosticism who were maligned for engaging in, presumably horrible material and acts. And it has a lot in common with Platonism, the philosophy brought forward by Plato or by Socrates, depending on who you ask. That being said, they really sort of fall into their own definition. I think describing Gnosticism expressly as a branch of Christianity is inherently wrong, but also describing it as neo-pagan or pantheistic is also inherently wrong. It's just on its own, and it's really important to sort of judge it on its own. I've also heard some people argue that Gnosticism is really this modern Kali Yuga, global homo world we live in, this clown world kind of paradigm. That being said, I think that's a little much. I'm not really sure I fall for that argument. Doesn't mean that there aren't criticisms to be made about Gnosticism. It's just I find it a peculiar conspiracy when there's so many more obvious labels that could be put on people who put forward the idea that everybody's just going to live in perfect harmony if we get rid of every border and designation and every term, to the point that art and literature and culture and people and nations and all those things just sort of get corroded into a pastiche of everything. I don't think that's really a Gnostic notion at all. That being said, anybody who has the argument that it is, I'd love to hear it. But let's go into the basic tenets of Gnosticism. First of all, there's a pessimistic element to it. It's certainly far from the environmental elements that you'd see in, like, say, European paganism, because they conceived the idea that everything you see physically is bad. The world is bad, Jupiter's bad, the universe is bad, bodies are bad, and that in and of itself, it sounds like I'm saying that it's sinful, but there is no such thing as sin. There's only ignorance, and that's where matter becomes a problem. That's why it's bad, is because if you believe, there's something very Matrix-like about it. If you believe that all the things that you see and perceive are reality, then you're being ignorant. You're falling for a big illusion. So the physical world is inherently bad. Not sinful. There's no such thing as sin. Only ignorance. Very important. But it is bad. So, this is where things get interesting. This is where it becomes what I called earlier an inversion. There's an unknowable deity who is, I wouldn't say created the universe. He sort of is the universe. Everything that is good, knowledge itself, is sort of an emanation of this deity known as the ineffable. I think I said that already. But one aspect of the unknowable, of the ineffable, was corrupt, and again, the word evil is a bit of a misstatement. Very ignorant, very self-absorbed, I think would be a good word for it. Very conceited, and this being is called the demiurge. And the demiurge is just one of many emanations of the unknowable God, many of which are positive, called aeons. But the demiurge is different. He's blind, he's obsessed with himself, very conceited, and he created what we see as the physical world. He created the earth, and he even created human beings, trapping the divinity, with a capital D, of the ineffable in flesh that he created. And this is where it becomes an inversion. So the God of the Old Testament is the demiurge. He's a wicked being. He's the antithesis of that which is good in the world. So not really, and therefore unworthy of worship. So that's where this inversion comes from. So the ineffable, feeling sorry for humanity, sends a messenger to teach us knowledge, which is where, I'm sure that some of you have probably seen the nice guy Lucifer memes. Well, that's where that comes from. It comes from Gnosticism, this notion that Satan granted knowledge to humanity, and in doing so actually elevated them on behalf of the ineffable. So in that sense, I suppose you could say that Lucifer is an aeon. Either that or just a fragment of the ineffable who's helping to elevate humanity and help us understand that this world is bad and rotten and so forth, and to escape the demiurge's clutches. So that worked for a while, and then people kind of forgot. Again, that's the sad thing about knowledge. If it is good, it still is ultimately forgotten. And so the ineffable sends another messenger. This time he sends Jesus to teach them. And this is where the Gnostic scripture comes from. The Gnostic Gospels, you may have heard of them. You can find them in the Nag Hammadi. We actually covered this in the podcast for 13th Floor. What episode was that? I think it was our first episode. I think it was the Hollow Earth episode. Yeah. So interesting stuff. But ultimately, that didn't work because then people glossed it over with the mainstream Gospels. And by the way, just for the record, none of the things I'm saying am I actually ascribing to and insisting are real. I'm just telling it from the perspective of Gnosticism. So anybody who has an argument like, well, I don't buy into this whole Gnostic gospel, I'm not arguing in favor of them. I'm simply explaining what Gnosticism is as objectively as I can. So, Jesus sends that message, to elevate humanity above the evil demiurge, who, again, to reiterate, is Yahweh. And of course, it gets forgotten, and then you end up with modern Christianity, and the Gnostics are hunted down and executed, and to this point, they're pretty much underground. Really fascinating stuff. Completely not on par with mainstream Christianity, that's for sure. I mean, obviously, everything I've said, you would never call that a separate sect or denomination. I mean, it's its own belief structure at this point. They're too far diverged. That being said, I find it interesting that there is definitely a pantheistic goal or monistic goal in Gnosticism, because if you can acquire enough knowledge, which is where the name comes from, by the way, Gnosis means knowledge. If you can acquire enough knowledge about the real reality, the behind the matrix, so to speak, and can escape the clutches of the demiurge by purifying yourself to such a point. This is where it kind of goes hand in hand with Neoplatonism, Christian mysticism, Sufism, and even to a lesser extent Kabbalah, and certainly the Hindu notions of monism and pantheism. If you can purify yourself enough, you will remove the taint of the material world, and as such, be reunited with the ineffable. So that pretty much covers Gnosticism. I mean, I can't think of anything else really that needs to be covered. I'm glad actually, because this is going to be a shorter vid, and I really don't want to overextend it anyway. 10 minutes is really like the best time amount for me. Maybe I should go over a few other things. Let me see. Oh, I can't believe I almost forgot Sophia. Okay. The lowest emanation of the ineffable is Sophia, which, Sophia represents knowledge. You see this in like Dante's Inferno, for example. And it's sort of, you could say that she's like the physical feminine counterpart to the ineffable himself. And you could even argue that she's sort of like a reflection, like a positive reflection, a reversal of the demiurge himself. So it's fascinating to see that survived into mainstream Christianity in many respects, this notion of, a lot of elements of Mary and Hagia Sophia and Sophia in Dante's Inferno, things like that. You see these Gnostic little hidden components that sort of survived because there was, like I've mentioned in previous videos, when you have a spiritual vacuum, it gets filled by something. And in many respects, there's such a hypermasculine component to Christianity, early Christianity, not now. Now it's been sort of castrated in many respects, but you see so much of that in the past that it sort of created a vacuum that was filled, and that what filled it was the Gnostic notion of Sophia, the Gnostic notion of gosh, that's so hard to say, Yaldabaoth. And you see Yaldabaoth mentioned in both Gnosticism, a lot of like Freemasonry kind of stuff, like occult stuff, even in the Ritual of the Bornless by Aleister Crowley, which actually I think that Yaldabaoth is even in the original, which is much older and is not written by Crowley. I can't remember who wrote the original Bornless invocation. But anyway, bottom line, Gnosticism has a lot of fascinating terminology and things that are very different from your typical run-of-the-mill Christian branches. I feel like there's one other thing. Oh, archons. I knew I wanted to cover one other term. It's easy to mix them up with aeons. They're sort of like the angels or demons that you see in mainstream Abrahamic religions. But they're more, you could also draw a parallel with the Sephiroth, really, because, again, they're emanations. They're 7 emanations of the ineffable. And, oh, man, what else can I really say? Oh, my gosh, I said ineffable, of the demiurge. So these are like negative aspects of the demiurge that play roles, different deeds on earth. I'm trying to think of a better way to explain that, but you've got Sabaoth, Adonaios, Aeolos, Astaphanos, and Horaios, and incidentally, in Iao, and all of those are also mentioned in the Bornless ritual as well, if I recall. So peculiar stuff. I highly recommend you look into the Ophites, the Sethians, and the Nag Hammadi if you're curious more about Gnosticism. I'm not going to go too far over a lot of material, but I don't want to make this too long a video. These 20-minute videos are just, they're too long. And anyway, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share, and keep asking questions. Bye.